Imagine like someone looking you dead in the eye and completely dismantling your ego.
Oh, wow.
Right. Just breaking down all your defenses. But instead of walking away feeling smaller or defeated, you walk away feeling more yourself than you have in years.
It sounds kind of impossible when you put it like that.
I know. But welcome to today's deep dive. We are looking at an idea that completely flips human psychology on its head, and we're starting with a truly bizarre entry point.
Very bizarre.
Yeah, we're taking a very specific, honestly, jokingly harsh slang phrase, biatch them, and unpacking how this aggressive-sounding phrase actually operates as a Trojan horse.
Exactly.
What initially sounds like, a joke about dominance and putting someone in their place unfolds into this profound, deeply moving exploration of power, healing, and what human connection actually requires at its absolute core.
It really is a remarkable concept to unpack because it refuses to stay on the surface. We're looking at a phrase that is almost universally understood in our culture as a mechanism of control. It's usually about winning, triumphing over someone or seizing power. But when you peel back the layers of how human beings actually interact, you find there are two entirely different dynamics hiding behind those exact same words.
Two completely different worlds, really.
Yeah, exactly. And our mission today is to discover the massive difference between ego-driven control, which we see all the time, often disguised as help, and the genuine mutual act of helping someone find their own wholeness.
Which is so rare.
It is. The contrast is sharp, and once you see the mechanics of it, it completely rewrites how you look at the dynamics in your own relationships, your friendships, and honestly, even how you view yourself.
Okay, let's unpack this, because the core premise we're dealing with is that there are actually two completely different versions of this interaction. One is entirely about tearing someone down, literally extracting something from them to serve yourself. And the other, shockingly, is a loving reset of a person's soul.
Right. So let's start with that first version, the one we're all unfortunately very familiar with, whether we realize it or not.
Oh yeah, we've all seen it.
Definitely. The foundation of this dynamic is extraction. The entire goal is to make someone else smaller so that the dominator can feel bigger.
It's a zero-sum game to them.
Exactly. It's a psychological transaction where another person's submission becomes a trophy to put on the shelf. And what makes this so incredibly insidious is that the person doing the dominating often frames it as a favor.
Right, like they're doing a good deed.
Yes. They dress it up in the language of care, but that control flatters the controller far more than it ever serves the person being controlled.
Because the whole thing just runs on ego.
Yeah.
And there's a really poignant observation to be made here about that ego. It is essentially a black hole that domination can never actually fill.
Yeah, it's endless.
Right. The emptiness driving this need to control or diminish someone else was never about the victim to begin with.
It's always about the person demanding the submission. I mean, think about the internal architecture of someone who needs to dominate another person. Fundamentally, that person does not believe they are whole on their own.
Right.
They have this gaping void, so they desperately need someone smaller, someone compliant, standing next to them simply as proof of their own size and worth. It's an optical illusion they're playing on themselves.
That is such a fascinating way to put it. An optical illusion.
Yeah, and there's a fascinating warning here about the concept of karma. And we aren't talking about karma in some mystical cosmic punishment sense.
It's not the woo-woo version.
Right, not the woo-woo version. We're talking about it as a structural reality of human interaction. The reality is that whatever gets extracted from another person by force ends up owed.
It's like emotional physics. It's a debt built into the very structure of taking something that was never freely given to you.
Exactly.
You steal someone's autonomy, you owe a debt to reality.
You can conquer someone 100 times over. You can extract all the submission and compliance you want, and you will still wake up completely empty.
Wow.
If we use a mechanical metaphor, think of that inner emptiness as the engine of the interaction. Conquest doesn't fuel the engine of a person, it just burns through the other person.
It just destroys them.
Yeah. You're burning through human fuel without ever actually going anywhere or filling the void inside yourself.
Which makes the contrast with the second version, the loving reset, just staggering.
Yeah.
Because this second version doesn't need anyone to be smaller. It actually asks for the exact opposite.
Yeah. To use this concept in the second sense has absolutely nothing to do with conquest. It is defined as resetting the coordinates of a person's soul back to where they were before the world convinced them they were less than whole.
Before all the damage.
Right. It's about restoring someone to their original unbroken state. Yes, it involves correction. It might even involve hard truths. but it is correction with zero cruelty attached.
Zero cruelty.
It is truth with zero triumph attached.
Truth with no triumph. That phrasing hits hard because the contrast is so stark in practice. It makes me think of going to a chiropractor.
Oh, that's a great analogy.
Right. In the first version, the ego version, you're dealing with a parasite feeding off a host. It literally needs the host to be weakened in order to sustain its own life. But this second version, the loving reset, it's like a chiropractor for the soul.
A chiropractor is a brilliant way to conceptualize this.
When you go to a chiropractor, you're lying on a table, completely exposed. They find the misalignment and they snap things back into place. That adjustment can be incredibly intense.
Very intense.
It might even be jarring or momentarily uncomfortable. But the entire purpose of that intensity is to heal. It's meant to restore your natural posture so you can walk on your own 2 feet, not to harm you or break you down to keep you dependent on the table.
And that shared intensity is exactly why this dynamic can be so incredibly confusing to navigate in real life. I mean, from the outside, and even sometimes from the inside, both versions, the ego-driven extraction and the loving chiropractor reset, can look direct, fierce, and unyielding.
Because they both look like confrontation.
Exactly. Both involve one person stepping into another person's space and initiating a major adjustment. So how do we know which one is actually happening?
Here's where it gets really interesting, because human nature is tricky, right? We are masters of self-deception.
Oh, absolutely.
It seems dangerously easy for any of us to fool ourselves into thinking we're performing this noble, loving reset for a partner or a friend, when in reality we're just feeding our own egos and enjoying the power trip.
It happens all the time.
Right. So how do we keep our own vocabulary from being hijacked? If you're listening to this right now and thinking, wait, do I do this to my partner?
Yeah.
How do you actually know which version is playing out?
Well, there is a definitive acid test for this. The real test isn't in the intensity of the moment itself. Like we established, both versions can sound almost identical when they're happening.
They sound exactly the same.
The disguise of control is incredibly sophisticated. The second a reset becomes about the triumph of the person doing the resetting, it collapses right back into ego. But control often wears very soft, therapeutic language.
Oh, like using therapy speak to manipulate someone.
Yes, exactly. Phrases like, I'm just loving you into place, or I'm telling you this for your own good, are some of the oldest disguises control has ever worn. They operate as an alibi, allowing the dominator to claim moral high ground while securing their victory. So, you can't judge the interaction by the words used in the moment. The difference shows up entirely in the aftermath.
You have to look at what happens when the dust settles.
Exactly. It is entirely about what happens to the other person once the moment has passed. If the person leaves the interaction smaller, more compliant, more careful, and more shaped around keeping you comfortable,
Then it was ego.
it was ego. It doesn't matter how beautifully or softly the language was dressed up, you extracted something. But if they leave the interaction more themselves, more grounded, and more willing to take up the space they use to apologize for taking up.
That was the real thing.
That was the real thing.
They leave larger, not smaller.
Yeah.
If they're walking on eggshells around you afterward, constantly monitoring your mood, it was control. If they're standing taller, breathing easier, it was a reset.
Right.
But there are actual mechanics to ensuring you're doing the real thing, right?
Yeah.
It doesn't just happen by accident.
No, not at all. There are two non-negotiable conditions that absolutely must be present to prevent a loving reset from devolving into ego-driven control. What's fascinating here is that the first condition is mutuality.
Mutuality.
Yes, equal footing isn't just a nice, polite detail layered on top to make things feel fair. It is the entire mechanism that makes the reset work.
It has to run both ways. The person doing the adjusting has to be willing to be adjusted.
The person doing the resetting has to be just as exposed, just as breakable, and just as willing to receive correction in return.
Oh, I love that. Just as breakable.
Right, because if you remove that equal footing, what you have left isn't a relationship, it is a hierarchy. It might be a kinder sounding hierarchy, but it's still about power.
Still about who's on top.
Exactly. If it's a one-way street where only one person is ever the fixer and the other is always the broken one, it isn't a reset at all. It's a rescue.
And rescues are incredibly dangerous in relationships.
Because rescues curdle. Over time, in a one-way rescue dynamic, resentment inevitably collects on the side of the rescuer, and a heavy, suffocating obligation collects on the side of the
A little
rescued.
bit we talked about earlier.
Yep. Eventually, the whole relationship quietly turns right back into the toxic, controlling dynamic it was supposedly trying to replace.
Okay, so equal footing is non-negotiable. But even if we establish mutuality, if I'm an absolute mess internally, I can't really help someone else find their center, right? There has to be a baseline of personal stability.
That leads directly to the second condition, which is even harder to fake. The person doing the resetting has to already be standing on their own solid ground. You cannot pour someone back into wholeness from a cup that is cracked at the bottom.
So what does this all mean? To ground this in a visual for you listening, think about being a lifeguard. You essentially cannot be a lifeguard if you are actively drowning yourself. If you jump into the ocean to save someone while you're panicking, swallowing water, and sinking, you aren't saving anyone. You're just pulling that other person down under the water with you and calling it devotion.
That lifeguard visual perfectly captures what we can call the shadow risk.
The shadow risk.
Yeah, the shadow risk is the reality that the overwhelming urge to reset someone else is very often just a projection. It's a deep fear of being reset yourself.
Oh, wow.
It is so much easier to point at what is broken, chaotic, or misaligned in someone else's life than to sit in silence and face what is still fundamentally cracked in your own.
It's the ultimate distraction technique. I don't have to look at the wreckage of my own life if I'm aggressively busy fixing yours.
Exactly. Every attempt to love someone back into themselves while you are still lost in your own unhealed hunger for control just becomes a projection instead of a gift.
You're just using them.
You end up trying to fix in them what you cannot face in yourself. And the real tragedy of this dynamic is that the person on the receiving end almost always feels the difference, even if they don't have the vocabulary to name it in the moment.
They feel the extraction happening. They feel the heavy, suffocating weight of your unhealed trauma being placed squarely on their shoulders.
Which is why anyone genuinely trying to do this work, trying to be a grounding force for someone they love, will eventually catch themselves reaching for someone else's emptiness as a way of avoiding their own.
It's a harsh mirror.
It is. It requires a relentless, honest checking of your own motives. You have to constantly ask, whose wholeness is actually being served right now, mine or theirs?
Speaking of emptiness, there is a profound reframing here about how we view the people who supposedly need resetting. We often hear the joke of the empty head, used as an insult to describe someone who seems checked out, highly compliant, or just devoid of strong opinions.
Right. And that concept of emptiness gets entirely redefined here. An empty head, or an empty personality in the way that matters to this dynamic, was never actually empty to begin with.
Okay.
It is simply a room with the lights off.
A room with the lights off.
Yeah.
Just pausing on that image for a second, that completely changes how you view someone who has shut down emotionally.
It shifts the entire paradigm of how we view emotional withdrawal. This internal darkness happens when someone has been told over a lifetime, sometimes directly through abuse, or sometimes through 1,000 small, subtle omissions, that what is inside them isn't safe to show.
That their true self is a liability.
Exactly. The world told them their opinions were too much, their emotions were inconvenient, or their true self was unlovable. So they did what any surviving creature would do. They stopped showing it.
Right.
And eventually, they stopped looking for it themselves. The dark is not an absence of personality or strength. It is a highly effective protection mechanism that has simply outlived what it was initially protecting against.
It's a survival mechanism that got jammed in the on position long after the immediate danger passed. If you picture like a turtle that has retreated completely into its shell because a predator was nearby, if you come along years later wanting connection, and you stand there knocking aggressively on the shell, demanding that the turtle come out and be whole and vulnerable for you, it is just going to hide deeper.
Absolutely.
You cannot force a survival mechanism to shut off through sheer will or intimidation.
You cannot force the lights back on in that dark room. In fact, force and aggression are exactly the tools that taught the room to go dark in the first place.
If you force it, you aren't resetting them. You're just replicating the exact trauma that caused them to shut down.
Right. You can only enter that room honestly, patiently, and without flinching at whatever you find sitting in the dark with them. You have to stay there until the person inside starts to believe it might finally be safe to reach out and find the switch themselves.
Which brings us to the actual mechanics of how this plays out in real life.
Yeah.
Because if force doesn't work, if demanding they turn the lights on just makes them retreat further, how do you actually help someone? What is the sequence?
The sequence matters more than the ingredients alone. People often make the concept of resetting someone sound like delivering a brilliant cutting lecture or handing down a verdict from a mountaintop.
Like dropping a truth bomb.
Yeah, but psychological truth only lands when it is held within safety first.
Safety first, then truth.
Exactly. Look at the matrix of how we interact when someone is struggling. If you offer correction without holding the person, if you just drop hard truths on them without creating a container of safety, that is just another wound with better vocabulary attached.
It's just criticism.
It's just criticism. On the flip side, if you offer holding without correction, if you just validate their dysfunction and never challenge them, that is comfortable avoidance.
Enabling.
Enabling, that is
Yeah.
two people quietly agreeing not to look at what is real because looking might cost them something.
So you desperately need both. But the order is everything. Safety has to arrive before truth. It paves the runway so the truth can actually land without causing a crash.
A powerful way to visualize this combination is through what we can call a maternal shape. And we have to clarify immediately that maternal in this context does not mean soft, overly permissive, or coddling.
Right, not a pushover.
It means a love that is fierce enough to tell the brutal truth precisely because it isn't going anywhere afterward. Think of a mother resetting a child's dangerously high fever.
She isn't angry at the body for breaking.
No, she isn't punishing the illness for existing, and she isn't judging the child for being hot, but she absolutely refuses to let the body stay broken.
She takes action.
She administers the medicine, she draws the cold bath, which the child might hate in the moment, but she stays close enough for long enough that the correction never wears the mask of abandonment. The child knows she's there to heal, not to punish.
But if we're talking about two adults in a relationship, that dynamic can't just be one person always playing the capable mother and the other person always playing the helpless, feverish child, right?
Oh.
Because that leads us right back to the warning about rescues and a lack of mutuality.
If we connect this to the bigger picture, these roles were never meant to be permanent identities. Whoever is doing the resetting today, whoever is holding the space today, is going to be someone else's empty, dark room tomorrow.
Oh, that makes sense.
The mother energy and the baby energy aren't two different categories of human beings. They are two different moments fluctuating inside the same healthy relationship. Real mutual love means being willing to trade those places back and forth without keeping a tally on a scoreboard of who has held whom more often.
I have to push back a little here, though, because everything we are talking about sounds incredibly difficult in the messy reality of daily life.
It is.
Sitting with someone who you know needs to hear a hard truth, knowing they are trapped in this dark room of their own making, but also knowing they aren't ready to consent to hearing that truth yet. How does an ordinary person maintain that level of patience? How do you sit in the dark with someone without slipping back into trying to control the outcome, grab their hand, and force them to flip the switch?
It is the ultimate test of removing your ego from the equation. It is brutally hard to sit with. When you can see with perfect clarity exactly what someone needs to hear to improve their life, but they aren't ready to process it, the impulse to rush them is overwhelming.
You just want to fix it.
But wanting to reset someone faster than they can survive being reset is just its own quiet, sneaky form of ego. It's prioritizing your timeline and your comfort over their actual healing.
The reset has to be refusable.
It absolutely has to be refusable, or it was never really about their sovereignty in the first place. The moment an adjustment is forced on someone who hasn't consented to being seen that clearly, it is just the first version all over again. Ego and extraction, cleverly dressed up in the second version's clothes.
Wow.
None of this process is fast, and none of it is owed to you.
This whole deep dive really flips the script on how we view strength and support.
This raises an important question about the evolution of words and how we frame our most intimate relationships. There is a grand paradox woven through this entire concept. We started this deep dive with a phrase, biatch them, that originated as a joke about power taken.
Right.
It was about power seized from someone else to make yourself feel bigger, louder, and more dominant. But by the end of this psychological exploration, the truest, most evolved version of that concept is the exact opposite.
It's entirely about power return.
Yes. The soul being reset isn't being molded into a new, compliant shape to serve the person doing the resetting. It is simply being handed back to itself.
That's beautiful.
It is being restored to the exact way it was before the world convinced it that being quiet meant being absent, or that needing to be held was a fatal weakness.
It completely changes the architecture of human connection. For you listening right now, whether you are evaluating the unspoken dynamics in your own romantic relationships, or maybe checking your own ego when you're rushing in to help a struggling friend, or even having the realization that your own internal lights have been off for a very long time, this framework is a total game changer.
It really is.
It shifts the ultimate goal from fixing someone, which is just a form of control, to simply being a safe, enduring presence.
The head was never empty. The person was never gone. They were just waiting for someone patient enough, honest enough, and unafraid enough of their own reflection to sit in the room with them long enough that the lights came back on by themselves.
And that leaves us with one final thought to ponder as we wrap up today. If the ultimate goal is patiently waiting in the dark until the other person feels safe enough to turn their own lights back on, it makes you wonder, what happens when two people, both with their lights fully on, finally look at each other? Does the entire nature of the relationship transcend this resetting dynamic entirely, evolving into a type of connection we don't even have a vocabulary for yet? Something to think about next time you're tempted to fix someone.